Millionaire saw his twin sleeping with a black maid on the floor. What he did next will shock you. The city was quiet when Daniel Mercer parked his car and stepped out into the cool night. It was well past midnight. Street lights drew long silver lines across the sidewalk, and the air held that clean smell after a short evening rain. Daniel rubbed his eyes and locked the car. His suit jacket was draped over one arm, his briefcase in the other. He had left the office late again. Another last-minute call, another late decision for a project that never seemed to end. He told himself it was only for this quarter, only until the numbers looked better, only until the new deal closed. Those words felt thin now. He touched the simple gold ring on his keychain, a keepsake from his late wife, and took a breath. Inside, the townhouse lights were dim. He expected silence, an empty kitchen, and two sleeping children tucked upstairs. But as he reached the kitchen door, he noticed a soft glow coming from beneath it. Not the bright, steady light of the ceiling fixtures. This was gentler, warmer, like a candle or a lantern. He paused with his hand on the knob. Was someone still awake? A refrigerator hum floated through the wood, and he caught a whisper of something else, maybe a very quiet snore, or the slow, even breath of sleeping children. He pushed the door open carefully, as if the night itself might shatter, and stepped inside. At first, he saw only the light. A small camping lantern, set low, spread a golden circle on the floor tiles. Then his eyes adjusted, and the scene opened. On the kitchen floor, two small shapes curled against a third. Leo and Lila, 6 years old, mirror images in soft pajamas, were fast asleep on a nest of blankets. Between them, like a gentle wall and a pillow both, lay Grace Okafor, the family's maid and the kind presence that had turned a house into a home in so many quiet ways. A hardcover storybook rested open near her hand. Its pages were a little bent, as if a tiny breeze had tried to turn them but failed. A line of cushions protected them from the cabinets, and 2 glasses of water sat within reach. A folded dish towel served as a tiny pillow where Lila's cheek pressed the floor. Someone had thought of everything. For a long moment, Daniel did not move. He took in each detail as if he were afraid to lose any piece of it. Leo's stuffed bear lay trapped under one arm, its soft ear peeking out. Lila's hair, still damp from a bath, curled like little question marks against her forehead. Grace's shawl, blue, with a simple stitched border, covered the twins' legs. The lantern light softened every line of their faces. The whole scene felt like a painting, calm and tender and real. But as the warmth of it sank into him, so did the case-tied first touch of dawn came through the blinds when Daniel opened his eyes. He hadn't slept much, but strangely he didn't feel tired. His mind had been running all night, circling the same picture, the kitchen floor, the lantern, the twins safe under Grace's shawl. He had seen a truth that couldn't be unseen. Now he wanted to understand more deeply, not just by watching but by listening. He moved quietly, careful not to wake the children on the couch. He brewed coffee and cracked eggs into a pan, humming without realizing it. Soon the smell of pancakes joined the coffee. It wasn't often that Daniel cooked, but today it felt important. He wanted to start with something simple, something warm. The sound of footsteps came softly from the hall. Grace appeared, still adjusting her shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes widened when she saw him at the stove. "Good morning," Daniel said gently. "You've done enough for everyone. Please, sit." Grace looked uncertain, but the smile of someone who didn't want to be rude slowly spread across her face. She set her hands together, nodding in quiet thanks. The twins woke soon after, rubbing their eyes, hair sticking up in all directions. They ran to him, both talking at once about their kitchen camp and how Miss Grace had made it fun. Their words tumbled over each other, and Daniel found himself laughing, though his eyes stung with emotion. After breakfast, when the twins were busy with a puzzle on the living room rug, Daniel invited Grace to sit by the window. Sunlight painted the table with bright squares. He asked softly, "Tell me what happened last night." "I saw a little, but I want to hear it from you." Grace lowered her eyes at first. "It was only small things, sir." The lights blinked, the sensor beeped. The children were frightened. Upstairs was too warm for them. "I thought the kitchen was cooler. I made it a little game camp night." They calmed down. "That is all." Her voice was steady, but her hands folded and unfolded in her lap. Daniel waited, giving space for silence to fill. Finally, she added, "I am sorry for using the floor. I did not want to disturb you. It was the safest way for them to sleep until morning." Daniel leaned forward. "Grace, you don't need to apologize. You turned a difficult night into something safe for them. They weren't scared because of you. I saw it the way they looked at you, the way you cared for them." Her shoulders relaxed a little. She glanced at the twins, who were now giggling over puzzle pieces. "They remind me of my own son," she said softly. Daniel stilled. "Your son?" She nodded, her eyes shining with a pride that needed no words. "Yes. His name is Chike. He is 9. He lives with my mother until I can bring him here. Every week we call. I send money for his school. He is clever, loves numbers. He dreams to be an engineer." Her voice trembled with the mix of longing and strength only a parent could know. Daniel felt a heavy wave of guilt. How had he not asked before? How had he missed this important part of her life? "Grace," he said carefully, "you've given so much to my family. And yet I never asked how I could support yours. That will change now." Her eyes widened in surprise, unsure if she had heard him correctly. He continued, "I saw your classes marked on the calendar. You're studying, aren't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Caregiver certification. Evening classes, 2 nights a week. It is slow, because tuition is high. But I want to finish. It will give me better skills, more stability for Chike." The puzzle pieces clattered to the floor as the twins cheered about finishing one corner. Grace smiled and stood to help them, but Daniel gently touched the edge of her sleeve. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "And thank you for last night. You gave them comfort I should have been here to give." Her reply was simple, "They are good children. It is my duty." But Daniel heard the truth behind it. It wasn't just duty. It was hard. The plumber arrived soon after, followed by the building manager. They set to work on the leak and the air conditioning unit. Daniel stayed nearby, making sure everything was done right. He asked questions he had never bothered with before, wanting to learn. While the workers were busy, he walked back into the living room where Grace was sitting with the twins, guiding them through a storybook. The way her voice rose and fell, the way the children's eyes sparkled, it was a reminder. Home was not just walls and furniture. It was people, and the way they cared for each other. That evening, when the repairs were complete, Daniel asked Grace to join him at the dining table. He pulled out a notebook where he had written ideas during the night. He pushed it toward her. "These are things I want to change, starting with your room," he said. "A real mattress, new bed frame, proper lamp. And more support for your studies. Medical coverage. A raise. Paid time for you to call your son. Grace, you are part of this family. It's time I treat you like it." Grace blinked in disbelief. "Sir. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Daniel replied. "Just know that this is not charity. It is justice. You have given us more than we realized." The twins ran in just then, holding up their drawing, a picture of 3 small figures under a blanket in the kitchen, a lantern glowing above them. "Look, Daddy. It's our camp night." Grace covered her mouth with one hand, overwhelmed. Daniel felt his heart tighten again, but this time it was with gratitude, not guilt. He knew this moment was important not just for her, but for him too. He had been so busy building a future in numbers and contracts, but last night showed him that the real future was right here, drawn in crayon by little hands. As the evening light faded, Daniel looked at Grace and then at his children. He realized he wasn't just listening to her story. He was rewriting his own. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Daniel's decision the night before was not just an idea. By the next day, he had already started turning it into action. When the sun rose, he dressed quickly, kissed his children on the forehead, and told Grace to come with them. She looked confused, even hesitant, but he assured her, "This is important. Trust me." The twins were excited, of course. They thought it was an adventure. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Lila asked from the back seat. "Is it another camp night?" Leo added. Daniel only smiled in the rearview mirror. "Something like that," he said. They drove across the city until they reached a large home store that had just opened for the day. The automatic doors slid apart, and the children rushed in, wide-eyed at the rows of colorful displays. Grace walked slowly, keeping her hands folded in front of her, clearly unsure why they were there. "Come on," Daniel said, leading them straight toward the furniture section. "We're here to fix something that should have been fixed long ago." Grace's eyes widened as she realized they had walked into the bedding area. The twins were already bouncing from one display to the next, pressing pillows, testing mattress firmness with little jumps. Daniel turned to her. "Pick one," he said firmly. "A proper mattress. And anything else you need to make your room comfortable." She shook her head, almost whispering. "Sir, this is not necessary. The room is fine." Daniel looked directly at her, his voice soft but steady. "Grace, I saw that thin mattress last night. It isn't fine. You take care of my children as if they are your own. I can't let you sleep on something that even a guest would not accept. Please let me do this." Her lips pressed together, and for a moment she seemed torn between gratitude and discomfort. But when she saw the twins tugging at her hands, urging her to try the beds, her face softened. At last, she sat down on one of the display mattresses. She sank into it, and her eyes widened in surprise at how firm yet soft it felt. She whispered almost to herself, "It feels like floating." "That's the one," Daniel said without hesitation. He signaled to the store assistant. "We'll take it, and a proper frame to go with it." The twins clapped as if they had just won a prize. "Miss Grace gets a real bed," Leo announced, his voice echoing in the big store. Grace laughed shyly, covering her face with her shawl. They didn't stop there. Daniel guided them through the aisles, new linens, soft pillows, a rug for the floor, a sturdy desk lamp with adjustable brightness. The twins chose a star projector nightlight, declaring it would help Miss Grace have her own little camp sky every night. By the time they left, the cart was piled high. Grace walked behind them, overwhelmed, whispering quiet thanks every few steps. When they returned home, Daniel helped the delivery men set everything up. He rolled up his sleeves and worked alongside them, to the surprise of the twins and the astonishment of Grace. The old thin mattress was carried out. In its place stood a proper bed, layered with fresh sheets and soft blankets. The rug lay underfoot, giving the small room a warm, inviting feel. On the desk, the lamp shone a soft glow, and the star projector painted tiny constellations across the ceiling. The twins squealed with delight, lying on the rug to watch the glowing stars. Grace stood in the doorway, her eyes shimmering with tears she tried to hide. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You already have," Daniel said. "Every day." But Daniel wasn't done. That afternoon, he sat down with Grace at the dining table while the twins played in the yard. He placed a folder in front of her. Inside were documents for a pay raise, health coverage, and enrollment forms for her caregiver certification course fully funded. Her hand trembled as she touched the papers. "Sir, this is too much." "No, Grace," he interrupted gently. "It's too little, compared to what you've already given us. This isn't charity. This is respect. You've cared for my children with love and dignity. You deserve the same in return." For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Finally, she bowed her head and said softly, "Thank you for seeing me." That evening, when everything was calm, Daniel pulled out his laptop and drafted a message to his company's board. He explained what had happened, not naming Grace but sharing the lesson. If someone in my own home, who cares for my children, can go unnoticed in her needs, then what about the hundreds of support staff our company employs: drivers, cleaners, assistants? We must do better. The next morning, he announced a new company policy: every domestic and support worker employed by executives would receive proper housing standards, emergency kits, tuition assistance, and regular wellness checks. He called it the Care with Dignity initiative. The board was surprised, but after hearing his story, they agreed. Meanwhile, his PR friend, who had heard about the new staff room transformation, urged him to share the story publicly. Daniel refused the spotlight but agreed to one short, anonymized post about the importance of seeing people fully, not just for their roles. He ended the post with the words, "Respect is not a gift, it's the minimum we owe to those who care for what we love most." To his surprise, the post went viral. Other executives began sharing photos of changes they made for their staff: new rooms, education support, healthcare access. Families across the city were moved, inspired by the story of a maid who had turned a blackout into a magical camp night for children. In the small room at the end of the hall, Grace stood one evening with the star projector glowing overhead. Her son's photo on the desk seemed to smile back at her more brightly than ever. She whispered a promise to him: "One day, you'll join me here. And life will be brighter." Daniel, standing quietly at the door, heard her words. He didn't interrupt. He only smiled and knew deep in his heart that a single night on the kitchen floor had changed not just his family, but many other. The weeks that followed the kitchen camp night became a quiet turning point in Daniel Mercer's life. What had begun as a small moment of surprise finding his twins and Grace asleep on the kitchen floor had transformed into something larger, something that rippled far beyond the walls of his townhouse. The children were the first to show how deep the change had gone. They began speaking about Grace not just as Miss Grace, their caretaker, but as part of their little circle. "She's our family too," Leo announced one afternoon while drawing. Lila nodded in agreement, adding Grace's picture to their crayon sketch of the Mercer household. Daniel watched this with a swelling pride, but also with humility. It reminded him of the night he realized he had been too blind to notice the thin mattress in her room, the quiet sacrifices she made every day without complaint. Grace herself was different too. At first, she carried the same quiet air of humility, almost as if she could not believe the new bed and improved room were truly hers. But slowly, she began to walk with more confidence. She took her evening classes with greater focus, knowing tuition was no longer a heavy burden. Each week, Daniel made sure she had set times to call her son. Sometimes he would hear her laughter echoing down the hall during those video calls, and the sound would fill him with a deep warmth. It was proof that dignity had the power to restore not only comfort, but joy. One Friday evening, as Daniel returned from work earlier than usual, he found the twins and Grace in the garden. They had planted small pots of herbs and were teaching the children how to water them carefully. Daniel paused at the gate, watching unseen for a while. The scene looked ordinary, but to him it was extraordinary. Grace's patience, the children's trust, the way the sun set gently across the yard, it all seemed like a living reminder of the night when everything changed. But the transformation didn't stop at home. Daniel's company, once focused solely on profit margins and growth, began to adopt the Care with Dignity initiative he had announced. Executives who had never considered the lives of their drivers, cooks, or cleaners began setting up proper housing allowances, health coverage, and education funds. Photos started to circulate internally, a driver's children smiling at their new study desk, a housekeeper finally receiving medical treatment she had delayed, a cook enrolling in a culinary class he had always dreamed of. Employees began to whisper that their company was becoming known not just for its profits, but for its humanity. And outside the company, the effect grew too. The short post Daniel had written anonymously about seeing the full story before judging continued to spread across social media. Ordinary families began to look at their own relationships with those who worked quietly in their homes. Stories appeared of people buying new mattresses for live-in helpers, of parents offering paid time for nannies to pursue studies, of young professionals realizing their cleaners or caretakers were sending money across borders to support entire families. The world, in small but meaningful ways, was shifting toward kindness. For Grace, life carried both new hope and new responsibility. She excelled in her certification program, earning high marks. When Daniel surprised her with the offer to become household manager, she hesitated at first, worried it was too big a step. But he reminded her that leadership was not about status, it was about care. She accepted, and soon the twins began introducing her to visitors proudly as the one who runs our home. Months later, the moment came that marked the deepest change of all. Grace completed her certification, and Daniel hosted a small celebration in the living room. The twins decorated with balloons, and Daniel ordered a cake with her name written on top. Grace stood there, holding her certificate, tears in her eyes. She whispered, "I never dreamed this would happen. Thank you for believing in me." Daniel shook his head. "No, Grace. Thank you for showing me what real care looks like. All I did was finally see it." The lantern that had glowed in the kitchen that night was placed on a shelf in the living room as a symbol. Whenever the twins asked about it, Daniel would tell the story of the blackout, of the blankets on the floor, and of the maid who turned fear into safety. He would end the story the same way each time: that little light showed us a better way to live. And so, the legacy of that night lived on. Grace grew stronger in her role, her son thrived at school with the support she could now provide, and the Mercer family became closer than ever, not because of wealth, but because of shared respect and love. Daniel himself became known not just as a successful businessman, but as a man who listened, who acted when he saw need, and who chose dignity over distance. The lesson was simple, but powerful: sometimes the smallest acts, laying blankets on a kitchen floor, turning a blackout into a game, can open the eyes of those who had been too busy to notice. And once eyes are opened, hearts cannot remain the same. That one night had changed many lives. Not just for the millionaire who learned the value of care. Not just for the maid who gained the respect she had long deserved. But for countless others who heard the story and chose to look closer at the quiet people in their own lives. Because kindness, once shared, never stops. It multiplies, spreading from one kitchen floor to homes and hearts everywhere. Ons. Why were they on the floor? Why here? Why not upstairs? Was there a problem with the beds? With the power? Had something scared them? He went to his knees in the doorway and touched Leo's forehead, then Lila's, the way he had done since they were babies. Cool and normal. No fever. He looked at the thermostat on the wall. It blinked a small code he didn't recognize. Near the back hallway, a little sensor light flashed the leak detector for the guest bathroom, if he remembered right. He frowned, trying to piece together what he'd missed while his phone was on silent during the meeting. The kitchen clock ticked softly. From outside, a distant car passed. Inside the circle of light, the three sleepers barely stirred. He moved closer and slid one arm under Leo, another under the stuffed bear, lifting both at once. He had done this 1,000 times, and the motion still made something in his chest ache with joy. Leo gave a tiny sigh and nestled against his father's shoulder. Daniel carried him to the living room couch. He returned for Lila, who mumbled a little and clutched the dish towel. He smiled without meaning to, swapped the towel for a real pillow from the couch, and tucked the blanket under her chin. He considered waking Grace, but the sight of her hand still close to the storybook, as if she had tried to keep reading until the last moment, stopped him. She must have stayed up until the twins fell asleep. She must have chosen the floor so she could be between them and the door, just in case. She must have given them the shawl from her own shoulders. He fetched another blanket from the hall closet and came back to the kitchen. He bent and spread it gently over Grace, careful not to startle her. The lantern made a soft click as he lowered its brightness a touch, letting the room settle deeper into rest. He stood for a moment with one hand on the back of a chair. He thought about the day, about the call that had run 40 minutes longer than it should have, about the dinner he had missed, about the bedtime he had missed again. There was always a reason. There was always a plan that would make up for it tomorrow. But here, in the small, golden pool of light on the kitchen tiles, was the truth of tonight. Someone else had told the story, someone else had stayed, someone else had turned a broken evening into a safe memory. On the counter, propped against the fruit bowl, he noticed a small folded note. The handwriting was neat and careful. "Mr. Mercer," it began, but he did not unfold it yet. He just held it in his hand and felt the weight of it. The twins slept in the next room. Grace slept on the kitchen floor because, for some reason, tonight the floor had been kinder than the bedrooms upstairs. He set the note down again and crossed to the thermostat. The little display flickered with an error. He tried the reset sequence he remembered from the manual: hold 2 buttons, wait for the beep, release. The screen went blank, then returned with the same code. He checked the window, felt a cool thread of night air along the sill, not much, but a sign. He glanced toward the hallway where the leak sensor blinked. He filed it all away. He would fix whatever had failed. But he wanted to understand what had happened first, and how the evening had unfolded without him. He looked back at Grace. He remembered the first week she had come to work for them, 2 years ago. The twins had been shy. She had cut an apple into stars and moons, and suddenly the kitchen had been a little sky on a plate. She had taught them a lullaby in a language he did not know, a gentle tune with a rhythm like walking home. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and he worked too late, that tune would drift down the hall and soften everything. He realized now that he had never asked enough about her life. He knew she had family she helped from afar. He knew she took an evening class twice a week. He knew she always tucked a small folded paper into her pocket, a grocery list, a reminder, a prayer maybe. He knew too little, and the thought made him uncomfortable. He wiped a spot on the counter with the edge of his sleeve and smiled at himself for the habit. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and a hint of cinnamon. Maybe they had baked earlier. The cooling rack held 2 missing cookies, their crumbs like quiet footprints. He found himself picturing the evening. The power flickered, the thermostat complained, upstairs was too warm for sleep, a sensor beeped, the twins grew anxious in the dark, the kind of fear that makes little hearts beat fast. He imagined Grace turning that fear into a camp, telling them a story, pouring 2 small glasses of water, spreading the blankets, placing herself like a gentle wall between the children and any worry. He imagined her reading until the lantern light blurred, until the words floated, until sleep laid its hand on her shoulder too. He checked the twins again, brushing Lila's hair back, adjusting Leo's blanket. He whispered something that was not a sentence, just a sound fathers make when they are both grateful and sorry. He took his phone from his pocket at last and woke the screen. There were missed messages, one from his driver, time-stamped right after dinner, one from the building manager earlier in the evening about a maintenance visit in the morning, one from an unknown number, maybe the plumber, saying confirmed for 9 a.m. He exhaled, half a laugh and half a sigh. The pieces were lining up. Still, he wanted to see it. He wanted to watch the way it happened so he could hold it, and not just guess. The security app opened with a familiar grid of small squares. He tapped the kitchen camera. The screen filled with a wide view, the doorway, the table, the place where the blankets now lay. He slid his finger back along the timeline until the pale bar reached earlier in the evening. The app marked tiny flags for motion or sound. One stood out at 10:47 p.m. It glowed a little brighter than the others. He did not know why. Maybe because the power had flickered then. Maybe because that was the minute the story changed. The small square of the past waited for his touch. For a second he watched the present instead, Grace sleeping, steady, the lantern a small moon, the couch in the next room where his children dreamed. He thought about what it meant to trust another adult with what he loved most. He thought about how easy it was to forget the people who carry that trust quietly. He felt the cool tile under his palm as he rested one hand on the floor. He felt the truth that had come into his house tonight: care is made of small choices, and the person who made them had done it well. He leaned back against the cabinet and let his head touch the wood. He would wake early. He would be there when the maintenance team arrived. He would make breakfast. He would read the note from the counter before the day began. He would ask questions, not just about the thermostat code but about the person who had turned fear into a game and worry into sleep. He lifted the phone again, the bright flag still waiting at 10:47 p.m. His thumb hovered over it, and he felt a tiny pull in his chest, a thread of concern and gratitude tied together. Daniel pressed play at 10:47 p.m., and the small screen filled with the quiet kitchen from a few hours earlier. The view showed the doorway first, then the table, then the open space of tiles. The app's timeline slid back a few seconds to catch the start of the motion. There was a flicker that passed through the room, like a short breath of darkness touching the lights. The ceiling lamps blinked off, then on, then off again. A soft alarm tone sounded from somewhere down the hall, quick and fussy, the kind of sound machines make when they want attention. The camera's night mode tried to adjust. When the picture steadied, he saw Grace enter the frame with a lantern in one hand and the twins beside her, each holding the other's fingers tightly. The video had no rich color, but even in the muted view he could see how calm she was. She knelt to set the lantern on the floor and turned the knob until the glow grew soft and steady. She touched the twins' shoulders, one after the other, in a small circle of comfort. Her mouth moved, and while the camera could not capture her words, her face made the story clear. She smiled. She made her hands into little tents to show how camp worked. She spread the first blanket like a picnic. Leo looked toward the hall and then back at her, and his body relaxed a little. Lila pressed her thumb to the edge of her lip, then dropped it, braver now. Grace left the frame for a moment and returned with 2 glasses of water and the shawl. She placed the glasses within reach and shook the shawl once, letting it fall across the blankets like a small blue lake. She looked toward the hallway again, likely hearing the sensor in the guest wing. She spoke to the twins, set a cushion against the cabinets, and guided them to sit. Then she stood again and moved quickly but not in a way that would scare them. She was careful, light on her feet. She checked the breaker panel near the pantry and the thermostat by the door. She pressed 3 buttons, waited, and pressed 2 more. The display flashed a code and stayed there. She went to the hallway, and for 30 seconds the kitchen stood empty. The twins waited, looking at the lantern. Then she returned with a book and 3 more cushions, and the children's bodies loosened in relief. The rest of the recording played like a small, kind play. She opened the book and tilted it so both faces could see the pictures. Her finger traced a line under the words as she read, and soon the twins' heads leaned in. The alarm down the hall stopped beeping, either because it timed out or because she had done something simple like pressing the reset on the sensor. She did not rush through the story. She turned each page with care. When the lantern flickered once, she squeezed its side and adjusted it, never stopping her gentle flow of words. Daniel paused the video and let the silence of the present house fold around him. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until he let it go. The simple picture on the screen was more powerful than any speech he could have heard. There were no dramatic moments, just steady choices. The worry in his own chest eased as if her calm had reached through the screen to settle him too. He tapped forward. At 11:09 p.m., he saw her make a little tent with the blankets and let the twins crawl under. At 11:13 p.m., Lila laughed at something in the book and then covered her mouth as if the sound were a secret. At 11:21 p.m., Leo placed the stuffed bear in the middle like a guard. At 11:34 p.m., the reading slowed. At 11:41 p.m., the little tent sagged because two small bodies were very sleepy. At 11:52 p.m., Grace rested her head back against the cabinet and closed her eyes for a second. A minute later, she lowered the book to the floor, checked the twins, and folded the shawl over their legs. The house stayed quiet. The kitchen stayed warm. He stopped the video there. He could watch more in the morning, but he had already seen enough to understand what mattered. He set the phone down and finally opened the note from the counter. The handwriting was neat and steady, with the small loops of someone who takes care to be clear. Mr. Mercer, it read. The lights blinked twice and the hallway sensor began to beep. The upstairs was warm and the children grew anxious in the dark. I brought them to the kitchen to make a camp and read until they slept. The plumber confirmed morning visit by text. I will stay by them where it is cool and quiet. I am sorry for the floor. I will tidy at dawn. Grace. He read the note twice. The line "I am sorry for the floor" made his throat tighten for no clear reason, maybe because it showed how she thought of him even while taking care of the twins. He turned the paper over to see if there was more, and found a small list written faintly in pencil: check AC filter. Silence leak alarm. Put cookies in tin. Refill water. The last line had a tiny star drawn by it. He pictured her standing here with the pencil, adding that star because water is important when children are warm and upset. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. He walked down the hallway to the guest bathroom where the leak sensor was installed. The air felt a little warmer here, and he could smell the faint clean scent of old water. He flipped the light on and listened. There was no new sound, only the hush that empty rooms hold. He crouched to look under the sink. A slow small drop clung to a cold pipe, round and bright, the kind of drop that could take hours to fall. The floor was dry because the sensor had alerted before anything spread. He reached up and turned the angle valve slightly to ease the pressure, the way a handyman had shown him once. He dried the spot with a towel and made a mental note to replace the gasket when the plumber came. He straightened and checked the ceiling vent. Warm air side out, not cool. That would explain the heat upstairs. He passed the twins in the living room on his way back and took a moment to watch them again. Lila had turned in her sleep and now faced the back of the couch, her hand resting on the pillow like she was patting a small friend. Leo murmured and then settled into stillness, his stuffed bear now resting under his chin. Daniel adjusted the edge of the blanket and looked at the clock. It was late, but he was wide awake, full of quiet energy that comes when a plan is forming. He wanted to see one more thing before he slept. He walked to the small staff room at the end of the hall. The door was closed. He had walked past this door many times and had never really looked inside with true attention. He turned the knob and stepped in. The room was very tidy. A narrow window showed a slice of the dark courtyard. The small desk was clean except for a neat stack of index cards, a black pen, and a tiny framed photograph of a smiling boy in a school uniform. On the shelf, he saw a row of folded shirts, 2 simple dresses, and a jar of sewing needles. On the wall, a calendar page marked 2 evenings each week with the word class and a small heart next to it. The lamp on the nightstand had a soft shade, and next to it lay a well-used charger cable bound with a ribbon. Then he looked at the bed, and his breath caught at the word bed in his own mind. It was not really a bed. It was a thin, folded mattress on a wooden frame. He could see where the fabric had smoothed under weight, where it had given up a little in the middle. A folded blanket sat at the foot like a promise that could not quite meet the need. There was a pillow, clean and aligned, but too flat. It made sense now why she had been willing to lie on the kitchen floor between the children. The floor and this thin pad did not feel very different. He felt a sting of guilt, not because he had ever meant to neglect anything, but because he now saw what he had failed to see. If a person can miss a thin mattress in his own house, what else had he missed? He went to the window and drew the shade up a little to let the moonlight in. The room softened. He studied the small photograph on the desk again. The boy's smile had that same calm, steady courage he had just seen in the kitchen video. He wondered if that was her son. He remembered a passing comment months ago about a birthday call across time zones. He had nodded then, already thinking about the email he needed to send. Now he stood still and let the picture mirror what he had witnessed tonight, a person who carried care like a quiet skill. He took out his phone and wrote a short message to the building manager: AC warm upstairs. Leak sensor tripped in guest bath. Plumber confirmed 9 a.m. Please prioritize AC filter plus check condenser first thing. Family needs cool air by afternoon. Will be on site. He sent another message to his driver: thank you for the earlier heads up. Please be here at 7:30 a.m. for parts run if needed. He opened a note app and started a list with small boxes he could tick: new mattress, bed frame, proper pillow, rug for staff room, reading lamp with dimmer, fresh linens, repair AC leak gasket, emergency kit, thermostat service. He added one more box and underlined it with his thumb: ask Grace about her classes and support them. He stepped back into the hall and closed the staff room door with care, as if the thin mattress could hear and feel the promise he now carried. In the kitchen, the lantern still threw a soft oval of light on the floor. He turned the knob down until the room was almost dark and then off. He stood there for a last moment, letting the coolness of the tiles through his socks anchor him. He remembered his late wife's voice saying, "People first," and he said the words back in a whisper. The house seemed to nod in agreement. He picked up the book from the floor and set it on the counter so it would be ready for morning. On his way to the stairs, he paused by the couch. He did not wake the twins. He only looked at them with the quiet attention that had been missing from too many nights. He put the folded note back on the counter where he had found it, but he kept its meaning in his pocket. He felt clear. He would be up before dawn. He would make pancakes and coffee. He would meet the plumber and the building team. He would thank Grace when she woke, not with quick words but with the care that matched her own. He would ask about the boy in the photo. He would listen. He turned toward the hallway, thinking once more of the thin mattress in the tidy room. It stayed in his mind like a small bell, steady and bright, calling him to make it right.